Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Mike Howard. I'm the lead pastor here at Revision, and I'm fired up to be here with you today. When I was 12 or 13 years old, my family and a few other people went to visit the Field of Dreams in Dyersville, Iowa. I don't know if you've ever been, but there is absolutely nothing anywhere around it. But it's kind of cool to see the ball field cut into the corn, just like in the movie. And when you go, you can actually join the pickup baseball game that's going on. And so we grabbed our gloves and ran out onto the field. And about 10 minutes later, a guy hit a sky-high pop fly right to my brother, who was at second base. And he called everybody out and said, I got it. And then it hit him square in the face. I don't think he got a glove on it at all. And just bleeding everywhere, like one of the giant blood clots hanging out of his nose. And you're welcome for that word picture. And in a moment like that, a good, loving brother would go over and put a hand on him and comfort him and tell him he's going to be all right. But I said, looks like you didn't got it. Which he didn't. What he did got was a broken nose, which really put a damper on the day. But here's what I wonder this morning. How many of us are living our lives like they're a game of baseball? Like the best and safest way to do things is just clear everybody out of the way and field it on our own. How many of us, no matter how big the obstacle is that's laying out in front of us, no matter how high that ball is in the air, are just saying, I got it. It's mine. I'm self-sufficient. I can handle it on my own. I don't need anybody else. I will figure it out. I'm self-reliant because that's what a strong, successful person is supposed to be like. My guess is that most of us in this room are living that way or really close to that way most of the time. It's hard not to. We're smack dab in the middle of a culture that constantly reinforces that that's the only right way to live and that needing people is a sign of weakness. And so we just go it alone. All the time we get that box from IKEA and you're like, I'm going to make it happen by myself. How hard could it be? Then you open up the directions and you see 3 pictures of a Swedish cartoon and 9 hours and 1 roll of duct tape later. You're like, I hope this didn't need 5 of the screws it came with. And it's supposed to lean to the left, right? That's a European shelf thing. But most of us would rather do that and experience that than ask for help. Because we just hate it. I got it is like the motto of American life. And it would be great if it works. But too often in life, I got it results in broken noses and leaning bookshelves. It just doesn't work the way that we hoped it would. And our determined self-reliance ends up costing us. And I think that mindset is particularly dangerous, and the damage is especially significant when it comes to our faith. There's something inside all of us that wants to believe that Christianity, that chasing Jesus, that faith is like my personal relationship, and it's something that I can do alone, and it doesn't matter whether I connect to other people. I don't need a community in order to pursue God and pursue the life and the dreams that He has for me. We spent the last month in this series called The Best Summer Ever, and we've been looking at myths and half-truths many of us have believed that we got to get over and we got to release if we're going to aim our lives in the direction God created them to go. And we're going to finish the series this morning by taking a look at this idea that my faith is personal and I can follow Jesus all on my own. Because it's not a rare way of thinking in our world. You have no idea how many people I talk to that are like, yeah, my faith is just mine, and I want to follow Jesus my own way. Like, I love Jesus, and I don't want to be a Christian, but I don't really want to connect to anybody. I don't need the church. In fact, I hate the church. Let's be raw and real for a minute. The church is flawed. There's so many ways in which the people of Jesus are messed up, and we don't always look like Jesus to the world. But the question is, does that mean we get to do away with the whole thing? Just get rid of them, disassociate, and go it alone when it comes to our faith? Not if we want to do it the way we were made to do it. And not if we want to accomplish all the things and make the kind of future-generating impact that God put every single one of us here to make. Because God says that community, despite all of its failings and despite all of its flaws, is a gift, and it's a source of life to us. And it matters that we get plugged into the right source. A few years ago, I was at my parents' house in Davenport, and I was thinking about where I was going to go watch some football games, because they hadn't had cable in a few years, at least that I knew of. And my mom said, so I got fed up and finally called Mediacom. I said, about what? She told me, well, we've been paying for cable for almost a year, but we just haven't had it. And so I called finally to complain, and the lady told me that what I needed to do first was get my remote and hit the button that said source until my TV said cable. And I did, and now we have over 100 channels. The Howards are not a technological people, okay? There's just none of us, but my parents are the worst. Only them. Like, they've been going through the motions of cable for a long time. They checked off all the right boxes, right? They plugged it into the back of their TV, and they paid the cable company. But until it got connected to the right source, it was useless. Man, your life and my life, no matter how tempting it is to believe we can check off all the right boxes of faith, and we can do this whole Jesus thing all on our own until we get connected to the source God has for us, it just isn't going to go well. And the truth is, we are missing out on something important, and we're settling for less when we settle for going it alone. I just think it's impossible to take the Bible seriously. Like, this whole narrative of what God is doing in the story of humanity, the way that he's related to us since he created the world, it's impossible to take that seriously without coming to the conclusion that community is a source of life and encouragement that we're meant to be plugged into. Because like this entire biblical journey, the journey of the Hebrew people in the Old Testament and the journey of the church in the New Testament is this story about how God is creating a people. He's shaping a community to be in relationship with one another and with himself and be a light to a dark world. You just cannot read this book without it becoming clear that there is no journey to God that does not also bring us to each other. There may be journeys that begin alone. You can start them on your own, but the destination is community. It's a place where you know and you're known. And I'm convinced if we want to live out this sermon title, we want to make this the best summer ever, if we're going to walk out of here this morning in the direction God would have us to go, we got to get this right, because it's a massive game changer for us and for our futures. So many of us have dreams. We have a picture of the way that we wish the world was, of the world that we want to live in, and of the things we believe we're destined to accomplish, the things God made us to do. But somehow we filter that through our cultural lens of self-sufficiency and decide that we got to walk out the doors of the church and go accomplish them on our own. Because achievement and meaning and greatness are individual pursuits. And we've come to believe that largely because that's the way we've been taught to read history. As we look back over the course of humanity over thousands of years, we tend to see history through the lens of just these great individuals, Alexander the Great and Caesar, Napoleon and Abraham Lincoln, and we believe that their singular greatness is the hinge on which human history has turned, and we act like none of those guys had an empire standing behind them. Like they didn't all have great generals fighting for them, but they did. Every one of them, and I don't care who it is. There's not a human that ever lived on this planet that did anything meaningful with significant and lasting impact all on their own. Nobody. And we won't either. One of the things I love is when the Bible kind of pulls back the curtain and gives us the story behind the story. It kind of shows us what God's been doing behind the scenes to make the big story happen. And the Abraham Lincoln of the Bible, like the guy who, outside of Jesus, maybe made the biggest impact and had the biggest, most outsized life, is probably David. Like from the minute we read about David as a young shepherd boy fighting off lions and bears, to the latter verses about him written hundreds and hundreds of years after his death because of his legacy, he just seems like a guy cut from a different cloth of greatness. David's a musician and a warrior. He's a poet and a king. And it's easy, I think, particularly if you're like me, if you're a churchy person who grew up on like the legends and the stories of David, to think of David as like this singular individual. This guy who, when everyone else was afraid, marched out alone to face the giant and cut the path that God had for his nation into the future, kind of all by himself. But if you actually read the story, he didn't. He didn't do any of it alone. If you got a Bible with you this morning, you can open it up to 1 Chronicles chapter 12. Hit 1 and 2 Kings, keep going. If you hit 2 Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, go back a little bit. If you don't have a Bible, you're welcome to grab one from the Next Steps table and take it home with you, or you can just follow along on the screen. But here's the situation in 1 Chronicles 12. David is the next king of Israel. The king, Saul, has kind of turned away from God, and so God sent the prophet Samuel to go and anoint David and say, he's going to be the next king. Saul, you're done. Your line is done, but we meet David here in this transitional season. Like, he knows what the future holds. He knows what God made him for, but he's not quite there yet, and Saul is not super happy about this whole thing. He's pretty ticked off, and he thinks he can thwart God's plan if he can just kill David. So he's got this big old army, and he's trying to hunt David down and kill him. And David is in this weird space where he knows that he is the future king, that this is God's plan. But he's not there yet, and his life is on the line. And this is what happens in verse 22. It says, day after day, men came to help David until he had a great army like the army of God. These are the numbers of the men armed for battle who came to David at Hebron to turn Saul's kingdom over to him, just as the Lord had said. And the next 13 verses list off hundreds of thousands who came to stand by David's side. They showed up. I think it's powerful. I think it's powerful to think about David in that season, because so often when we get a picture of what we want, even if we have an idea of what God wants from us, we want him to just hand it to us right away on a silver platter. Just make it happen like that, but he never does. He didn't for David. There's always a journey to get from here to there, and it's never a journey we can take alone. God doesn't just transport us there because there's a path he wants us to walk from where we are to where he wants us to be, and people matter along the way. There's a challenge of becoming who God made us to be. And you're created in a way that you can never rise to that challenge alone. Even one of the greatest leaders who ever lived, David, couldn't do it alone. A whole bunch of dudes showed up to help him. And I love it that they did that, because in this moment, that is not the safe choice. Okay? Saul has turned his back on God, and God has said David's going to be king, but right now Saul has the army. Saul has all the political power. Saul is the safe choice. These guys are risking everything to walk away from their king and their army and all that power to go help usher in the future God has promised. But they're at a point where they realize Saul is the past and David is the future. And it's this tension that they're living in. I think we live in a similar tension. This tension of the past being this safe space that we can inhabit. This safe place to dwell. And this future being a risky proposition that we got to go chase. And the truth is, you can sit in the past alone. And you can make the decision to ally yourself with the people who are living there. Or you can risk everything and decide you're going to roll with those who are chasing God's vision for what is to come. But if you do that one, I got to warn you, there's a cost. There's a cost involved in refusing to play safe and in chasing the future. Those warriors who joined David knew that being on David's team could be costly, and some of them were willing to risk absolutely everything for him. We read about them in 2 Samuel chapter 23. We call them the mighty men of David. The Hebrew word is the Gibborim. They were the bravest of the brave, and it tells the story of these guys who came alongside David. There was Eleazar who stood and fought in a battle until his sword froze to his hand. There was Josheb-Basshebeth who raised a spear against 800 enemies in a day. A guy named Shammah who was fighting the Philistines, and the rest of the army retreated in fear around him, and he stood in a field of lentils and said, "This is God's field. I make my stand here." And he fought until the Philistines got so scared of that crazy guy that they ran away. There's a guy named Benaiah who killed a lion in a pit on a snowy day. And in all, there were 37 of the Gibborim. They were David's generals. They were commanders of tens of thousands of men. And there were 3 of them to whom David trusted his life. The 4 of them were willing to give up everything for each other. And this crew of guys came not just to David, but to God, and said, "To you and to your people, for you and for your people, we're willing to give up anything and everything." The Old Testament is wrapped up in this story of the kingdom that David built, but there was never a kingdom that David built alone. It didn't exist, and it never happened. If David had fought alone, we'd have dead David, not King David. See, the future God promised, the blessings and the beauty of it, came about because those guys decided to do something. And this thing that they decided to do is something we don't do in America. This word that I'm going to use to describe it is not one that's real popular in our culture. It's like a dirty word. It's almost like a curse word for us in modern day America. It's the C word. I'm going to throw it on the screen. I'm going to ask you to read it with me. If you're uncomfortable reading a word like this, that's fine. You don't have to say it. Some of you, if you're in your 20s and you're a guy, you might even not even have the strength to spit it out. But can we throw it up there? Commit. Commit. These guys decided to commit. They're like, all right, we're all in. We're all in. Everything I have and everything I am, God, for you and for your people, I'll commit. And we live in a culture that's just terrified of that. It's the last thing on earth we want to do. We got to maintain our personal liberty and our autonomy at all costs. We can't commit to anyone else. I mean, this whole phenomenon of living together forever before you get married and cohabiting because you're just afraid to pull the trigger on that commitment, that's not the disease in itself. People worry about it. It's a symptom of a society that's afraid to commit to other people. We don't even know how to commit to each other anymore. We're more likely now to commit to a cause than to a community. Like, I'm committed to justice. I'm committed to eradicating homelessness. I'm committed to helping hungry people. We'll give ourselves to causes, but we hesitate to give ourselves to people. And I don't mean to denigrate giving yourself to a cause. That's good stuff. But there's a reason that we're more inclined to commit to causes than people, because causes cost us nothing. There's no accountability to a cause. You can claim it whenever it's convenient for you. You can drop in and drop out, and you don't owe anybody anything when it's a cause. But when it's a community, when it's people, there's a sense of ownership, and there's a sense that we owe each other something, and there's some accountability there, and it's vulnerable, and it's scary. Like, committing to other people comes at a cost, but the Gibborim, they committed themselves to David and to the future of their country and to God, and they were willing to risk everything, based on that commitment to God and his people. Are we willing to do the same? To commit our lives and our futures to God and his people, there's a cost. I mean, here at Revision, there's a cost next week. Next week is Reach Des Moines. It's the 5th Sunday in July. So we're canceling our services. We're meeting here at 9 a.m. We're spreading out around the city to serve with some nonprofits who are doing great things, because we are convinced that the love of Jesus ought to be tangible through his people and bring flourishing to our city. And most of us in here, 90+% I'm guessing, love that cause. Just love being a part of a church that gives and serves radically and regularly. But if we could take an X-ray machine to our souls, do we love being the ones who give and serve regularly? Like, there's a gap between our commitment to the cause and our commitment to the community. Committing to the cause means I love it that my church does that. Committing to the community means you got to show up next week because we need you. The jobs that we have promised to do, we need you alongside us to give and to serve, and you need us too. See, that's the beautiful flip side of this cost of commitment. It's an investment. You will never be who you're made to be alone. Ever. You'll always settle for less than the difference that God put you here to make, and less than the love that you were made to give and receive if you try and be an island or delude yourself into thinking you're one. We got to come to the realization that people are an essential and not an obstacle if we're going to lean into how God created us to live. And this thing that we call church is where we come together. This thing we call church is where we commit our lives and our love to one another. And church is not a building. It's not a place that we go to. Like, if that's what you think of, a building or a place when you hear the word church, don't feel bad. It's not your fault. Unless you're German, then it's your fault. You and the ugly, angry language of your ancestors. Just want to make that clear. But like, church comes from this German word, Kirche. It's a building. But the word in the New Testament is ekklesia, which means gathering of people. The church isn't a place we go to. It's a people we do life with. Like, in Christ, we're loved, and love people, do life with people. It's one of the core values here at Revision. Love people, do life with people. And at the church, from all over the place, from wherever we were, we come together. Not because we have a common background, not because we have a common story, not because we have a common situation, a common skin color, or even a common language, but because we have a common mission to bring the oxygen of Jesus' love to a world this gasping for air. And if we're willing, like as a people, to just come together and abandon the idea, not only that we should do this alone, but that it's even possible to do this alone, then there's something that happens in our lives. And Peter writes about it in 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 through 9. I love the imagery that he uses, because Peter is a guy who got a nickname from Jesus. His original name was Cephas. And then one day, Jesus walking along with the disciples, he's like, I'm going to call you Peter, Petros. You're the rock man. And so Peter gets hung up on this rock imagery, because that's his nickname. And this is what he writes. He says, as you come to him, the living stone, rejected by humans, but chosen by God and precious to him, you also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For in Scripture it says, see, I lay a stone in Zion, a chosen and precious cornerstone, and the one who trusts in him will never be put to shame. Now to you who believe, this stone is precious. But to those who do not believe, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, and a stone that causes people to stumble, and a rock that makes them fall. They stumble because they disobey the message, which is also what they were destined for. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you've received mercy. Once you were not a people, but now, Peter's like, something that happens when we decide, like, all right, I'm all in. Jesus stepped out of eternity into history. He gave his life for me so that I could be reconciled and redeemed, and I'm chasing him with everything we got, with everything I got. When we decide that, something happens inside of us. We get connected and knit together with this bigger story God is weaving. You have always been a person, but now we are a people. And we're an imperfect one. The church is imperfect. This church is imperfect. Like, to get knit together with the people around you doesn't mean that everything's always going to be hunky-dory and fine. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to hurt one another. We're going to fall short of the standard. And I'm going to lead the way in all that, because I'm a broken, flawed leader with a list that's a whole lot longer of things I don't do well than things I do. And I apologize ahead of time for all that, for all the places where I fall short and this church falls short. But here's my promise. We will do the hard work of committing to love each other and open up our lives to a hurting world, because we have exactly what this world desperately needs. We're like living stones. I love this picture, like living stones being built together into a spiritual house, like this dwelling place, this community where people can come and know and be known and experience life and get enfolded into community. This space that draws people and points them toward Jesus. I love it. Living stones, like a single brick, a single stone, a single brick on its own is pretty useless. But a brick house is mighty, mighty, letting it all hang out. That's the pinnacle of my preaching career, right? I peaked at 30. Everything I have to say is downhill from working at Commodore's line in the middle of a sermon. But anyways, Jesus is doing a thing. He's doing a thing when we give our lives to him and his people. And there's no other way to follow him than together. We got to understand this. Like, when God calls you, he doesn't call you to yourself. And he doesn't call you just to himself. He calls you to his people. God is calling us to one another. So the question you got to ask yourself, the questions are, who is with you and who are you with? Who's with you and who are you with? I'll answer one of them for you. Who's with you? I am. I am with you. I've been praying for you since before this church had a name, since before we even planted it. Like 5 years ago, I started feeling like God was tugging at my heart to plant a church. And I told him no a lot of times. And the first thing I did when I thought he might be serious was hit my knees. And I said, please, please don't make me do it alone. Like, I cannot do this journey alone. I can't do it as like some leader on a pedestal. I need to be part of a community. I need my people. And you guys are so much cooler and better than I probably could have ever even imagined and drawn out if God gave me the chance that day. And so I love you guys. I'm with you. I'm with you. And I love this community. I'm all in. And here's what I want. Here's my promise to you, my commitment to you in love. I want to be one of your Gibborim. Like, I believe that God created you with a purpose, that every single person in this room is wired up uniquely to make some kind of difference in somebody's life. And I'm committed to being one of your mighty men. I will fight the battles with you, and I will walk with you towards that and stand behind you to help you create what God made you to create and make the difference God made you to make and live out the vision that he has for your life. I'm with you. And I believe all of us, if we can say that to one another, if we'll walk away from this myth of self-sufficiency and decide we're willing to do life together, we'll find that it's so much better, that it's what we're made for. In his book, Outliers, Malcolm Gladwell talks about this crazy phenomenon in the small town of Roseto, Pennsylvania. It's become known as the Roseto effect. It was a town that was originally settled by a bunch of people from Italy, and in the middle of the 20th century, doctors spent about a decade studying this town because it was incredibly confusing to them. See, the people of Roseto had a death rate that was half the national average and half the average of all the people around them. And they went almost a decade without any man under the age of 65 having a heart attack. It was a medical marvel. And so doctors went in to see what was going on in this town, and what they found was that they were not exactly health nuts. They were a bunch of Italians living pretty Italianly. They were rolling their own unfiltered stogies. They drank tons of wine, to the point that doctors wrote that they drank wine when they should have been drinking water. They liked meatballs and sausages and fried food, and a bunch of them worked in the quarries, which were making a whole bunch of other people sick. And so they spent a decade trying to come up with some reason, some medical explanation for the fact that these people weren't dying because they were living lives that should have been giving them heart attacks. And they finally came to the conclusion that the only thing that was different about Roseto and everywhere else was that they were living in community. 2 and 3 generations lived in houses together. They sat on their front porches. It was a city where everyone knew everyone, where they interacted regularly. They knew and they were known. And the doctors realized that the lack of heart disease was due to a lack of stress, and the lack of stress was due to one factor: living in community in a place where they were known. A whole bunch of people who should have been just dying off didn't, because they'd lived life together. That's what we were built for. So my challenge to you guys this week is this: stop treating life and faith like a baseball game. Like, please learn to stop brushing off help and saying, I got it, before life just hits you in the face, because it will. You don't got it. Lean in. Live into the story and the purpose God has for you by choosing to do life alongside his people. I know it's scary. I know it's vulnerable. I know there's a cost to it, but it's so much better. And if you're willing to do it, I got 2 specific, tangible applications for you. 1, sign up to serve next week at Reach Des Moines. Like, we need you alongside of us. Commit to this community and be here. And the organizations need us. Des Moines needs us. Des Moines needs churches that are all in on loving each other in a way that points the world towards Jesus. And number 2, in a few weeks, we're going to start registrations for house groups in the fall. Love people, do life with people. Don't pray about whether you should join one. Pray about what night you should join one. Save you some time, okay? You guys, something happens. Something happens that when we build our lives together and then open them up to a hurting world, God moves. He rewrites the future for the people around us, and he rewrites our futures too. You want to know what your future looks like? I can see it. Your future looks like your people. There are very few things that will have a bigger impact on your future than your choices and the people you choose. And when we decide to stop being self-sufficient, stop pretending like we can do faith on our own, and commit our lives to God and his people, man, it changes everything. Will you guys pray with me? Lord, thank you. Thank you for giving us each other. We know that all of us are flawed and imperfect, and sometimes doing life together hurts, and it's hard, and it's frustrating. We thank you for the gift of your people, for the gift of your love, for the encouragement that we find as we gather together. Lord, help all of us walk away from this idea that's so prevalent in our culture that we need to do it alone, or even that we can do it alone. And remember, you built us to walk this journey together. God, create space in this church, in this community, where we can be the Gibborim for each other, where we can be the mighty men and mighty women who help the men and women around us live into the purpose you created them for, and use us and use the love that we have to just shine your light into the darkness of our hurting world. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.